Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. In these videos, I almost share stories and information about individuals for whom an original wartime or post war photograph is known to have survived to the current time. For all the identified photographs shared here, there are many, many more historic images of soldiers and sailors who have become separated from their identities, their names lost in time, and yet to be recovered, yet to be reattached to their portraits. What can we say about those photographs? These unnamed individuals staring back at us, their fates unknown, left behind clues in the images that can help us find them. And the photographers did their part with unique backdrops and sometimes leaving their names and towns where their galleries were located. Here's one of those unknown images with lots of evidence to consider. Though this soldier's name has been lost in time, his portrait tells a story in broad brushstrokes. He sits confidently in a photographer's studio, dressed in what was a deep blue shell jacket of a Union cavalryman. The jacket is close fitting and trimmed with bright yellow piping that appears a dull gray due to the limitations of photography in the 1860s. We can see the pair of chevrons and diamond shaped lozenges stitched high on his sleeves, indicating the rank of a first sergeant. It's a position that wasn't necessarily handed out lightly. Now, he might have received the rank upon or soon after his enlistment due to his or his family's position in his community or his own attainments in his young life to date. Or he might have earned the rank due to battlefield skill, leadership, maturity, and often the respect of his fellow soldiers, his comrades, his pards. Whether he earned it in the chaos of a cavalry charge or through calm, disciplined service during camp and long campaigns, we really can't say for sure. But the chevrons do speak plainly of responsibility. We also know that he chose to be photographed without his shoulder scales, those ornamental brass attachments that were sometimes worn by enlisted men on dress uniforms and officers for formal occasions. The tabs where they would have been on his shoulders have remained. You can see those tabs on his shoulders, leaving impressions hinting at their former presence. The absence may signal a preference for his own comfort and the look that he desired to have, or perhaps they reflect a change in fashion as the war continued on and battlefield practicality and realities overtook the dress regulations. Now look at his boots. They rise to the knee, almost slightly above, polished and creased just enough to suggest that they have a little bit of wear in them. The stitching along the top edge is decorative, a flourish that hints at a private purchase, something he paid for with his own money. Now, government issue boots could often be plain and unforgiving, or brogans, the shoes. His boots, it is fair to state, were more than functional. They were a subtle mark of his individuality, and like many soldiers, many men that decided to wear them, they wanted to express their individuality. And it could also be his wealth, an example of his wealth. He could afford those boots. Now, paired with the reinforced trousers, if you look closely, you'll see visible wear along the inner seams, precisely where long days in the saddle of his horse would do the most damage. They suggest he was a man who carefully considered his gear and he had the funds, whether it was from his own pocket or from his soldier's salary. Now, in his right hand, he cradles a Smith and Wesson. Well, actually, in his right and left hand, he's holding it also in his left hand. He's cradling a Smith and Wesson #2 revolver. Thanks to my friend Phil Spoggy for this information. It's angled deliberately towards the camera. This is a 32 caliber 7-shot pistol, a popular personal sidearm among officers and enlisted men alike. It was not a standard military issue, but many soldiers bought them with their own money or were gifted them from friends and or family. If the Smith& and Wesson was a gift, it's intriguing to imagine that somewhere on it may have been an engraving with his name and his regiment on it. It was also a very common personalization of the period. Now, again, about the way he's holding the weapon, he's choosing it to display it prominently, and he's leaving an impression by doing that. He wants us to see that firearm, suggesting he's a trooper ready for action. The weapon also, we could infer, is a statement of pride, of vigilance, defense, and of his mindset. Hanging from the corner of his mouth is another detail, an intimate detail that suggests who he was, a meerschaum pipe with a rustic stem and what appears to be a bone or a vulcanite mouthpiece. This pipe gives us a fleeting sense of his personality. Soldiers on both sides smoked to pass the time, to calm nerves, to remind themselves of life back home. Meerschaum was soft and carved easily. It was a favorite material for pipes imported from Europe. It darkened with use, changing color as it absorbed the oils from the tobacco and the smoker's fingers. This particular pipe is a little bit lighter in color, which suggests that it was relatively new. Now, let's keep in mind, the pipe was not just a tool, it was his companion. And this one is tucked casually, coming out of his mouth, suggests that he enjoyed life's small comforts, even in the middle of war, probably helped him get through various camp and campaign activities. Now, look down in his coat, you'll see a bulge inside of his coat, which is barely visible. I think it could be a handkerchief or maybe a tobacco pouch. Another practical item, but an indication that if you pair the tobacco pouch with the pipe, it suggests it's not just a studio prop. This was actually part of who he was. It was part of his daily ritual, his way of life. Now, what we don't see is who was behind the camera. It was Edward L. Allen, a well established Boston photographer, or perhaps one of Allen's apprentices or an assistant. Originally from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Allen made his name and his home in the Bay State and became best known for a partnership with another photographer named Frank Roll. The imprint just below the print area, you'll see the printed name there, tells us that it anchoring to the bottom of it has his name, Allen, and also the address of his Boston studio. Now, we know that it's a Boston studio, but do we know that this cavalryman was a Massachusetts native? Did he enlist in one of the state's mounted regiments? Was he just passing through the city on a leave or returning from a campaign? Maybe he was stationed in one of Boston's military installations like Fort Warren in Boston Harbor, or was this portrait made before he left for the war, maybe a final image for his family to remember him by? Now, Boston, during the war, one of the largest cities in the country, was a bustling wartime place. Streets alive with soldiers, newsboys with the latest headlines, recruiters pounding their drums, families gathering in anxious farewells, excited homecomings, grieving the loss of a husband, a father, or a son that suffered death in combat or to disease. Could also have been seeing on those streets women raising money to support the troops, and some of those women going on to become nurses and serving in the hospitals around the city. As the war progressed, veterans missing arms and legs or other disfigurements became commonplace on those same city streets. At some point, when this soldier walked into Allen's gallery on 13 Winter Street, it may have been days or hours before he left for Washington, D.C., or another seat of war, or perhaps he was recovering from a wound or an illness on furlough and stopped to mark the occasion with a formal portrait. The style of the photograph also tells us something. It is a French import known as the carte de visite, or the card photograph, as many called it in America. It tells us more about our sitter. Card photographs, about the size of a modern trading card and wildly popular during the war, resulted in the invention of photograph albums. These images were the Facebook of the 1860s, purchased by the dozen and given away to family, friends, comrades, and other admirers. They were widely collected. You can tell that this photograph is or was in an album because the edges they look curved, but they're actually just ever so slightly clipped so that the person could slide the photograph into the hard, rigid, unforgiving pages of the thick albums. Now, likely chose this style, the card photograph, rather than a tin type or ambrotype, those artesian, one of a kind portraits on plates of iron or glass. Those images were more appropriate for the mantle, the bookshelf, or a bedroom table, rather than for public consumption. This photograph also helps us date the image. Beginning in August of 1864, the federal government levied a tax on photographs, popularly known or unpopularly known as the sun tax, to help pay for the enormously expensive war. Photographers were required to affix a stamp on the back. This image does not have one, suggesting it was printed sometime between 1861 and 1864. So, the evidence revealed by this photograph, both the content and the physical image, the photograph itself, suggest many possibilities. Is this wonderful tension of frustration and the beauty of working with identified images? I would say that it is. The portrait gives us the facts. We can see the uniform, the insignia, the revolver, the pipe, the photographer. But the man himself, we still don't know who he is. His name is currently out of our reach. The soldier remains unidentified, even though the likeness survives. Though he's nameless, he's not voiceless. His choices, the pose, the clothing, the items he held, all of these things offer insights into who he was: a human being, a man of action, a patriot, a man of his time, an individual with personal pride, habits, and comforts, just like us. A first sergeant who, as a non commissioned officer, was a leader among his peers, a smoker of tobacco and a meerschaum pipe, a cavalryman who made time to visit a photographer and leave a record of himself, even if the details of his service and his fate remain unknown. I often state that collectors are the caretakers of these images. We don't own them, we're just holding them to pass along to the next generation of Americans. We study the clues, and sometimes, if we're lucky, a name emerges. Sometimes years, decades can pass before the image and the name are reconnected. And during what can be a long wait for a name, the portrait of an identified sailor, a soldier, or another person who participated in the war reminds us of the human cost of the conflict, the human stories that altogether make up our American memory. And these surviving images always put a face to those times of crisis, though not always a name. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of A Life on the Civil War Research Trail.